Well, thank you very much. Can you hear me okay? Yes? Okay. First, let me say how happy I am to be here with all of you. I consider it a great privilege and an honor to be talk, and the main reason for that is I believe you are very important. You are important because you are the leaders of the future, certainly here in Korea, but I hope for many of you that you will have the same kinds of opportunities that many of us have had in the past, which are to lead not only in your own country, but to lead businesses or other enterprises that cut across a number of different countries. So the first thing I would like to say is thank you for inviting me. Dean, thank you for the kind introduction. I would like to start by saying that this topic of leadership in international business is a very broad topic. And there are lots of different ways that I could approach the topic. So I would like to break it down into a few different components. First of all, I know by some of the questions that I've already seen that you may have that you're interested in hearing something about my career, and I'm happy to talk about that, and I will. And the other thing is, I think it's important when we think about leadership that we think about what I would call the inputs of leadership, the things that go into making a leader, making a person a leader or making a company a leader, and then the outcomes of leadership. What comes out of leadership. So there are lots of different ways to think about this, and I'll sort of try to break it down into those pieces, the inputs and the outcomes. Let me start first with a little bit about my own background. As the Dean mentioned, my father was here in Korea in the Army at the end of World War II. So he was not in the Korean War. He was in Korea at the end of World War II as part of military government when the Japanese, of course, were leaving Korea, and a government had to be set up here in Korea. And so I remember growing up lots of things about Korea, and I remember particularly my father showing me pictures. He was stationed in a place called Yeongdeung-po, which I guess now is part of Seoul, right? Or it's like a suburb. So I remember seeing pictures of what this country looked like in 1946 and 1947. And that was even, of course, before the Korean War. I remember on my mother's vanity, you know, on her nightstand in her bedroom, was a black lacquer box with mother of pearl. And this was a gift that my father had brought back to my mother before they were even married in 1947. So I have a long connection with the country, and I think a great affection for the country. And the other thing that I would say to you is that I think it's very important for all of us, regardless of how it happens, that we get to learn more about people in other countries. And it may be through your parents, it may be through other sources that you have, but I do think it's very important to gain an appreciation, a little bit of understanding about what life is like in other places. I would also say to you in terms of personal experience that I think my parents were my best teachers. I remember I come from a family of lawyers, so my grandfather was a lawyer, my mother and my father, both lawyers, my wife, who is here with me today, also a lawyer. So part of being a lawyer, you know, at least in the U.S., is that lawyers like to talk. Right? And I managed to learn a lot by debating with my father and my mother at the dinner table. And this was a great source of knowledge for me. The other thing I would say is that I think that my family background, you may or may not be able to guess from my name, but my family background is Italian. And I think that my family background has something to do with my personality and with my outlook on life. If you ever have a chance, and I hope many of you already have, but if you haven't, go to Italy. Okay, go to Italy. And particularly, I would recommend to you, go to Naples. Naples is a city in the southern part of Italy. It is very sunny. It is very bright. Many people are poor, but they are very happy people. They are very optimistic people. I have a personal theory, which is that that has something to do with sunshine. Okay? And we hear sometimes that people say, you know, when there's not enough sunshine, they get depressed. Well, I think there probably is some truth to that. So if you start out with a positive attitude, you start out with a great advantage, I think, because you have a sense that you can accomplish things and that things will come out in the right way. The other thing that I would say about my family background is, again, connected to having come from an Italian family. I was trained usually in my school years by nuns and by priests. And at Fordham University, which the dean mentioned, I studied with the Jesuits. So they give you the Jesuits in particular, give you a certain sense of the way things you know, ought to work. They have a very strict educational system, if you will. And they call in Latin the ratio studiorum, which means the course of studies, the things you are supposed to study. I think they've gotten away from that now, but when I was in school, that's the way they taught you. And I think that gave us a lot of discipline and put into us a sense that, again, if you followed that course, you would be successful. So those are a few things about my own background. The other thing I would say to you is that just as a personal thing, I am a very impatient person. Okay, my wife will testify to that. Okay, I'm always in a hurry, right? And I don't think I hate any people, but I certainly hate certain things. And one thing I hate is wasting time. Okay? There's only one thing that you have a limited amount of, really, and that's time. So wasting it is, I think, maybe I'll go back to my Catholic background, it's a sin. It's a bad thing to waste time. So that's a little bit of personal background. If you want to know more, I'm happy to answer questions about that. But the second thing I would turn to then is, what about the inputs of leadership? What goes into being a leader? And I think for me, and this is a very personal thing, because there are many different styles of leadership, there are many different kinds of leaders. For me, leaders have to have certain things. First thing is vision, right? If you think about leadership, in many ways, what it is all about is making things better. Making things better. And in order to make things better, you have to have a vision of what you want to be better. And I think you can have a vision of making things better in any job that you do. You don't have to be, it's very nice, by the way, to be a president of something. It's very nice to be, you know, a cabinet officer. It's very nice to have a big title. But you can, and I think you must, have a vision of making things better no matter what your job is. You can have it in any level job at any time. And I'll give you one example, again, from my own career. When I first went to work at MetLife, I went to work as a lawyer. And I joined a group that was called litigation. Litigation is trying lawsuits. It's trials, trying cases, and arguing appeals. It was a great job. And as I gradually got more experience doing that, I realized that what we were doing was not really actually trying cases or actually arguing appeals. We were hiring outside lawyers in law firms to do that. So my vision for improving things became very simple. It was to bring the litigation in-house, to have our lawyers in the company actually try the cases, actually argue the appeals, not send them to outside lawyers. And why did I think that would be better? I thought it would be better because, number one, we would attract better quality people because they would be interested in actually trying the cases. And second, we would develop them better. We would train them better because they would really be doing the litigation. And the third thing that I learned over a little bit of time, it wasn't my first response, but I learned over a little bit of time that we could actually do it cheaper. We could save the company money by doing this. So we could get better results, better people, better training, and we could do it for less money. That was my vision. And I did that. Right? So you can have a vision of making things better at any level in any job. And that's really the first element of leadership as far as I'm concerned. Related to that is curiosity. You have to be curious about how things work. And that will lead you to ways in which you can make them better. Right? There isn't anything, and this sort of goes back to my Jesuit training, there isn't anything that can't be perfected. Okay? There isn't anything that can't be better. And if you remember, you probably know a company called General Electric, right? That's a famous company. Many years ago, what you won't remember is that General Electric had an advertising program. And the advertising program was, their slogan was, progress is our most important product. Progress is our most important product. Meaning, whatever we do, we make it better. And that was their point. Okay? So curiosity goes with that, because you have to be curious about the world around you in order to discover how can we make this better. A third element, which I would call an input of leadership, is collaboration. The world is very complicated. It is very difficult for anyone to do something significant in today's world all by yourself, right? You've seen the film, what do they call, Social Network? Social Network, right? About the fellow who began Facebook, right? He was a brilliant guy, is a brilliant guy. But even he didn't do it all by himself. He had a few people who helped him, right? And now he has a lot more people who help him. So the point is, you have to have collaboration. And I think there's a famous quote, I won't remember it exactly, but it's from Sun Tzu, I think, the Taoist philosopher, who says that real leaders, when the job is done, the people will say, we did it ourselves. We did it ourselves. Meaning that they will bring people in, they will collaborate, and when the job is done, everyone will say, well, we did it. Right? That's extremely important. So that's another element, to me, of leadership. A couple of more elements that go together. You do have to be courageous to be a leader. You can't always just take the popular course. Sometimes you have to make hard decisions as a leader that people will not like. And so you must be courageous in order to do that. And the last point that I would say is you do have to be determined. You have to see it through, whatever the task is. So to me, those are some of the main inputs of leadership, the things that go into leadership. Now, what most people focus on, I think, are not the inputs to leadership, but rather they focus on the outputs of leadership, that is, the consequences of leadership. And the consequences, of course, are very important. What are some of the consequences of leadership? Well, the first thing I would say is you generally see as a consequence of leadership that leaders are either doing something first, right? It's very easy to see that. They do something first. They're the first one to develop Facebook. Right? Or they do something better than others. Or they do something for more people than others. So someone said to me the other day, is your company, MetLife, are you a leader? And I said, yes, I believe we are a leader. Well, how can we see that? What's the consequence of that? Well, one consequence of our leadership is that we do things differently. Right? So, for example, here in Korea, our company has received awards for innovation in product, right? Coming up with new products. That's about leadership. Another way that you can see leadership is the number of people who come to you. So our company, globally now, has 90 million customers. So we must be doing something correctly for 90 million customers to be coming to us. I think that is an outcome of our leadership. So there are many, many different kinds of outcomes that we can see from leadership. In our business, in the insurance business, you see it in the number of customers. You see it in the premiums that people pay to us, that they're buying our products. You can see it in the amount of assets that the company has accumulated because it's managing all these assets for people. In our company, it's somewhere close to $500 billion of assets between general account of the company and separate accounts. So those are extremely important outcomes of leadership. The other outcome of leadership is what do you do with your position? Once you have attained a leadership position, what do you do with that position? How do you use that position to make things better? And I'll just give you a couple of examples of that I think are extremely important. One thing is that we're all here, at least I'm here this week, along with a lot of my colleagues from around the world. And why are we here? We're here in Korea for the G20 meetings. And Korea is demonstrating leadership in the G20 in many different ways. One way, one great way, I think, is that for the first time, the G20 has not just a summit of the leaders of governments, but a business summit. This is the first time. and it's being done here in Korea. So Korea is showing leadership by bringing the business community in to work with the political leaders. And I think that's a great example of something else I talked about earlier, which is collaboration. We do need to work together. There are many, many different things that we can do together, working with the business community and the government. If we try to do some of these things alone, I think we will either have a much more difficult time or we will fail. And a lot of what the G20 political leaders need to do now is they need to make sure that we have a secure world going forward, not just politically, not just militarily, but a secure world economically. And it's extremely important there that they draw on and use the talents and the capabilities of people in business. Another thing that we're doing here this week is continuing the work that we've been doing for a long time, many of us, which is to finally get the Korea-U.S. free trade agreement done. Okay? I think this is a very important thing to do. I think there are important benefits for the people of Korea and the people of the U.S. to have a free trade agreement between our two countries. And you know it's been a very difficult process to get that done. I think we are now getting very, very close, and we are hoping final agreement on this, and then that we will be able to get it passed by the legislatures, right? By the legislatures of both countries, because it's not just the presidents. We need to have the legislatures come in and approve the free trade agreement. So there are lots of things that we can do together if we collaborate and if we focus on making the world a better place. So I know I've said a lot of different things, a little bit about my background, a little bit about the inputs of leadership, a little bit about the outputs of leadership. Probably the most important thing we can do is for me to take your questions. I probably don't know the answers to all the questions, but I will do my best, and I will try to give you answers that are meaningful. But if it's okay with you, I will stop now and take your questions. Okay?
We'll now move on to the Q&A session.
Okay.
And we've collected a bunch of questions from this audience, and I personally selected a few that would be appropriate to the subject. And I personally was curious about it.
Okay.
And first question is, you mentioned about the importance of the Korea-U.S. FTA actually being done. Mm-hmm. It's been lagging over the past couple of years. Mm-hmm. Related to the topic, what does the financial industry stand to gain from the Korea and U.S. FTA, in your opinion? Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, I think this is a great question, and it's an important question. I think the first thing in answering the question, the first thing I would have to do is give you a little bit of background about trade. And you may know this already, but just to make sure we put it in context, most of trade, if you go back historically, was viewed as trade in goods. In other words, what could one country export to another country and vice versa, right? And the focus of a lot of trade history and trade law, frankly, has been about barriers to trade, which are called tariffs, right? So the idea is if a country wants to, if Korea wants to keep U.S. beef out of Korea, as an example, right? It's a commodity, right? So you put a very high tariff on that, and as a result, if if an exporter sends beef into the country and has to pay such a high tariff, then the beef cannot be competitive in price, right? So most of trade is about tariff barriers and bringing down tariff barriers. That's the history of trade and trade law. The interesting thing about what I do for a living and what many people do for a living is that we are not engaged in the financial services business. We are not engaged in selling any tangible product, right? And I know that in the U.S., 80% of the economy, measured either by GDP or measured by jobs, 80% of the economy in the U.S. is services. So 8 out of every 10 people in the U.S. that have jobs are working in services. This morning, I had a chance to meet with a well-known Korean economist, and I asked him the same question. I said, what percentage of the Korean economy is services? And his answer was 70%, 70%, right, of the GDP. So here is the issue. The issue is 70% of your economy here is services. 80% of the U.S. economy is services. And now we're trying to reach a free trade agreement between us, and tariffs have nothing to do with that, right? Because there's no way to put a tariff on a service, really, or not an effective way. So what we have to focus on in services is what we call non-tariff barriers. And here's a good example. If you want to put barriers up to trade in services, the way many countries have done it in the past and even currently is they create regulatory barriers to the entrance into the country, right? So, for example, they might say to an insurance company, you cannot be licensed in this country. They just prevent them, right, by regulation. Or, I'll give you an example of India. India is a country which has not banned foreign companies. They have allowed foreign companies. But in India, as a foreign company, a non-Indian company, you may only own 26% of a life insurance company. So that's a way that India can put up a barrier to trade, right? So now to answer your question, that one of the great things about the Korea-U.S. Free Trade Agreement is that it removes a lot of these non-tariff barriers. It gives the ability to compete fairly to companies, whether you happen to be a company from the U.S. or a company from Korea. So that's the main thing. It gives us an ability to compete by removing the non-tariff barriers. The other thing I would say is an important element of that is regulation, right? So it's very important for companies in the financial services business to have fair regulation and equal regulation. So we, as a foreign company doing business in Korea, we're happy to compete here as long as we can compete on what is called a level playing field. In other words, that we will be treated in the same way as a Korean company. And there's one more element to this too. And that is that in many countries, financial services companies or companies providing financial services are owned by or connected with the government. So for example, if you go to Japan, the Japan Post, which is the post office, right, which is the government, is actually in the insurance business, right? And there are similar examples in other countries. So one thing that free trade will do is it will enable companies to compete fairly against domestic companies in another country, but also against government-owned companies in another country. So those are some of the things that and by the way, I should say, the Korea-U.S. Free Trade Agreement, as far as I'm concerned, I've seen a fair number of these agreements. As far as I'm concerned, the Korea-U.S. Free Trade Agreement is the best one I've seen on financial services. In other words, it will be a gold standard, if you will. It will be a model. And as you probably know, a lot of the governments in Asia are working on what's called the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And I believe that the Korea-U.S. Free Trade Agreement will be a model for the Trans-Pacific Partnership. So it's another way in which Korea can lead, going back to the point that I was making earlier, because once we get the Korea-U.S. Free Trade Agreement done, I think others will copy it. And I think that will be very beneficial.
Now, let's talk a little bit about MetLife.
One of my favorite subjects.
Yeah. One of the students pointed out that in Korea, marketing insurance products is pretty challenging because many Koreans, I don't know about U.S. People in general, but many Koreans, student pointed out that they don't regard protecting against future risk very importantly. So if you had a chance to persuade some of the skeptical breed of the audience, how would you go about it? And specifically in MetLife, what kinds of products, what is the breadth of the product that you are offering, and how do they relate to everyday lives?
Well, this is it's a very good observation, and I think a very important question. You know, the first thing that I would say about this is you may think that Korea is a difficult market for persuading people about the benefits of the kinds of products that we sell, and I agree that Korea has its challenges, but the first thing I would say to you is Korea is one of the best life insurance markets in the world. In fact, it's number 8, if I'm right. It's number 8 in the world in the life insurance market. So it may be difficult here, but it's a lot more difficult in a lot of other countries. That's the first observation that I would make. But the second thing is, you know, the main thing about insurance is that it is based upon risk, right? And it's based upon pooling risks, and by that I mean combining risks that each individual has. So if we have a group here, and I'm just looking at the audience, you have a very young average age, right, in this group, very young. So for me, very, very young. Okay, so the point is when you are very young and presumably generally healthy, right, you do not think so much about the risks, about the things that can happen to you. I know, I was your age one time too, right? Many years ago. And you believe, and I think maybe intellectually you know that you could get sick or you could get hurt or you could die. Intellectually you know that, but really in your heart you don't feel like that. You feel like you're going to live forever. That's great. I don't want to take that away from you, okay? But here's the point. As you get just a little bit older, and maybe it's already true for some of you, you will marry. You will have children. You will gain property. You will borrow in order to buy things. You will borrow to buy an apartment or to buy a house or to buy a car. And then you will start to think about what happens if I cannot pay what I borrowed. Let me give you an example. Most people don't want to think about dying, so okay, we won't talk about dying. Okay? We won't. We'll talk about something which, in my opinion, is even worse than you say, what is that? Right? Some of the most difficult cases that we see are people who become disabled, people who cannot work, right? But they're still alive. And then the question is, not only are you deprived of your income, but you have expenses. You have greater expenses, perhaps because you are disabled. Your body is not fully functional. So one of the things that I always say to people is, people talk about life insurance to me sometimes. I say, before you think about life insurance, think about what happens if you can't work. Who takes care of your family? Who pays your bills? Who pays the things that you've borrowed? For this, you need income replacement. Now, some countries have government programs that do that, and that's fine. If they have government programs that do it, that's good. Other countries do not have such programs, or the programs are not adequate. So people need to think about what can go wrong. And that's what insurance is all about. It's for what can go wrong. The other part that it's about is what can go right. Okay? So for example, if you have children and you want to send them to college, right? And in this country, education is extremely important, right? Good for you. Your parents or someone had to save some money along the way to be able to help you or to provide for your education, right? We have products that help people save money for their children's education, but also products that complete the savings if the parent dies. So if the parent lives, they keep saving. If they die, the company pays money which is then put into a fund which is for the child's education. So these are important things, and I don't say these things to scare you. I say them because they're part of life. They're a practical part of life. And actually, I think the Korean people really have generally accepted the products that we sell, quite well. The other thing I would say to you is, you asked about the breadth of our products, and we do have a very broad range of products. We don't sell every product in every country, right? But we have them available if we find that there is a need in a market. So in some of our markets, there is a great need for something which is called long-term care insurance. Now, all of you are a long way away from needing this product, but what does the product do? The product is a product which pays people money when they are unable to do the tasks of normal daily living, right? So these are people who get older. They may not be in a hospital. They may not even be ill. They may just be old. As a result of being old, they cannot take care of themselves. They cannot take care of their house. They cannot bathe themselves. They cannot dress themselves. They need somebody to help them. They either need an aide to come into their home to help them do those things, or they need to go into what we would call a nursing home or an assisted living facility, right? People are living longer and longer and longer. Now the average age in Korea is 79, 80, okay? So if people need to have assistance in their older years, again, sometimes the government will help them, but in some countries, the government does not provide for those needs, or what the government provides is not enough. We have products that can provide for those needs. So it's a wide range of products. It goes from savings products to disability insurance that I mentioned, which is income replacement. It goes to health insurance in some countries. We even have, in some places, we have dental insurance, right, to take care of your teeth. It's gotten to be more popular. Now we sell quite a bit of dental insurance in Brazil. Why? Because people want to have a good appearance and they want to be taken care of in terms of their teeth. Okay? We can provide for that. So we have a broad range of products, and I think, but for us, it's always a matter of educating people and showing people what is the value of what we sell. And by the way, we have lots of competition. So if we can't do a very good job, our competition will. Okay?
Now, as a follow-up question, there was another question regarding healthcare reform. As you may well know, U.S. is trying to introduce the government's role into the healthcare system, while Korea is seeking to bring private sector into the healthcare system. But this is arousing concerns regarding low-income families who can't be provided a quality healthcare. How do you think the government and the private sector can coexist to effectively provide health insurance?
What we do, if you think about our business, in the insurance business, a lot of what we do is done by governments in some countries, right? And so you can see that as an example. One of our early presidents of our company, this is a man named Haley Fisk, he was president of MetLife around the beginning of the 20th century, so the early 1900s. And he said in one of his speeches that insurance is not a business. It's not a business. This is interesting. It's a social institution. And in one sense, he was right. Right? Because if you think about Social Security, which has occurred in many countries, if you think about health care, what we do, the work that we do, is in many cases work that could be done by a government. I think there are opportunities to collaborate. And the thing I would say is, I think the main thing we have to do is make sure that people have the necessary coverage, whether you're rich or poor. I believe that very firmly. The second part of that is, okay, if people are poor and they can't afford to buy this coverage, then I do think government has to provide it. That's a function of government. Several governments have said things like, we provide a safety net, right? We catch those who are not caught by the rest of the system. So in my business, and see, here's the difference. We are in a business. Okay? My company, and if you, when all of you leave university and if you go to work in the business world, many of you will work for publicly traded companies. My company is a publicly traded company. What does that mean? It means we have shareholders who provide us with our capital. They buy our shares. And we are traded, our stock is traded on the New York Stock Exchange. Right? Now, when our shareholders buy those shares, they expect a return on their investment, right? You would too. If you buy stock, or if you buy a bond of a company, you expect a return. That's fair. So our company is in business to make a profit, okay? A reasonable profit, not an exorbitant profit, but a reasonable profit for our shareholders. So we can't do that necessarily if we have people who are so poor that they can't afford to pay for the products, right? But those people do need to be protected. So I think there are ways for governments and private businesses to collaborate. And actually, in the U.S., in the healthcare reform, that's what they're trying to achieve. Now, whether they will be successful is another question. I'm not sure if the current healthcare reform in the U.S. will be successful, but that's what they're trying to do.
One final little personal question.
Sure.
Judging from your familiarity with the Korean business people, what do you think is the strength and weakness of a Korean CEO?
Oh boy. Well, now I'm in trouble because I'll tell you I have two what I'll say two Korean CEOs. Our current Korean CEO Jong Kim is here in the front row, and his predecessor Stu Solomon is. Now you may say he's not a Korean CEO, but I would say Stu Solomon is more Korean than many Koreans. He's been here for a long time, and so.
We won't let you out until you answer this question.
Okay, no, I will answer it. I will answer it. You know, I know several Korean CEOs, including the two gentlemen that are sitting in the front row, and I would say this: I think that strengths of Korean CEOs that I've seen in the past, some of the qualities that I talked about, right? Great vision, great determination, great courage, in many cases collaborative skills. And I think you can see that, you can see the outcome of that, right? Back to my earlier point about outcomes. You can see that in terms of what's happened in this country in the last 30, 40, or 50 years. I mean, it's just miraculous. Now, in candor, I've also had experiences with Korean CEOs where I'd say they could do better, right? And I'm sure they would say the same about me, by the way. So I think one of the things that I've seen in the past is sometimes a difficulty in making change, and maybe in making change as quickly as, at least as quickly as I thought was a good idea, right? And I said to you before, I am an impatient guy. So I think sometimes I've seen examples of situations where it's, you know, this is the way we do it, this is the way we've always done it, and we really are not going to change that very quickly. And so but here's the great thing. I think when you see that, one of the biggest antidotes for that, one of the biggest ways of solving that is competition. Because if you're in competition, you very quickly find out that if you don't make changes, if you just try to stick with the way it's always been done, you may suffer the consequences. So I think, but I'd say on balance, more strengths than weaknesses.
Okay.
Thank you.